Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everyone, depending on where you're joining us from around the world. My name is John Badger, and I'm one of the co-founders of ShareVault and the VP of Marketing and Product. I would like to thank you for joining us for our webinar today, and I will be introducing our speaker momentarily. This is the 32nd in ShareVault's webinar series, and today's topic, Maximizing M&A Value, Minimizing Surprises, is especially timely considering M&A activity reached a record high in 2015. Each of the transactions centers around a definition of and agreement upon value. From the standpoint of any seller, it is critical to understand the core aspects of the buyer's key valuation criteria in order to achieve maximum valuation for their assets. At ShareVault, we frequently work with customers and investment bankers who are wrestling with many dimensions of valuation, from market size parameters and trends to accretive technology and team alignment, to customer synergies and beyond as they manage these highly confidential and strategic conversations with prospective buyers. We will explore these topics shortly, but let me briefly cover a few logistical items. First, although your individual audio will be muted in order to minimize background noise, we do encourage you to submit any questions at any time during today's presentation via the question box located in your webinar control panel. Secondly, there will be a Q&A section for questions and answers following the presentation. We hope to get all of your questions answered, but if time does not permit, we will make every effort to respond to your question by email after the webinar. And lastly, our speaker has generously offered to make a recording of today's presentation available. You will be notified by email when the recording becomes available. You'll also receive instructions to log into a ShareVault where you can download the slide deck. First, a bit of background on ShareVault. We launched ShareVault in 2006, and since then, we've become a leading virtual data room provider with over 75,000 users and with customers in 48 countries worldwide. Our platform is known for combining bank-grade security features with a speedy, responsive, and easy-to-use user interface. Our outstanding customer support team is available 24/7 to handle any questions that you or your end users might have. ShareVault has been used for due diligence in tens of billions of dollars worth of deals, including acquisitions, mergers, venture financings, private placements, and IPOs. Here are just a few examples of tombstones for transactions that were done using ShareVault for due diligence. So now, it is my pleasure to introduce Elias Eladias. Elias is a manager in the operational transactional services practice at EY in San Francisco. He has 15 years of business and operational experience that includes M&A and strategy consulting at Big Four firms and product development and operations roles at Intel Corporation. Elias's client work focuses on merger integration and separation, operational and commercial due diligence, portfolio management, growth strategy, and enterprise profitability improvements. He has experience in a wide range of industries, including semiconductors, software, SaaS, electronics, networking, and medical devices. We are thrilled to be with you today, Elias, to learn from you as we discuss ways to maximize M&A value and minimize unwelcome surprises. So, welcome, and please feel free to begin your presentation.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, John. Appreciated the introduction. So, hello, everybody. My name is Elias Eliadis, and we know when Richard and John approached me a while ago, asked me if I was interested in participating in a webinar for this audience, I was very excited to share some of the learnings. As consultants, we see a lot of deals from early in the strategy and inception phase through the due diligence and deal execution phase, and then all the way to the integration or carve-out. So this gives us a very unique perspective where we can see some common themes develop and try to use them to help both buyers and sellers be successful. So what I wanted to do today is share some of these themes, talk about how they exhibit themselves, and offer some thoughts on how to mitigate the risks and maximize the value of the transaction. So with that, let me hand this over to John for our first polling question.
And I can see that people are still filling that out, so when that starts to slow down, I will put an end to the poll. Okay, let's go with that. I'll go ahead and close the poll now. And Elias, would you like me to show the results?
That'd be great, yes.
There we go.
Okay, so it's pretty clear that we have primarily an interest in sellers' perspective and followed by buyers and both. So thank you all very much for providing your feedback. Okay, so let's go now to the next slide, please. Perfect. So as John mentioned in the introduction, M&A volume in 2015 was at record levels given the strong cash position and also the availability of credit for acquirers. So the main question now in many people's minds is how will the recent stock market volatility and the risk of global economic slowdown impact the M&A landscape? Many believe that despite the slowdown in the IPO market, the anticipated volume of M&A transactions is actually expected to continue well into 2016. We're going to share some of that related content and resources with these insights at the end of the presentation. The key driver for continued deal activity is the need for companies to continue to grow their top line, continue to achieve scale, and drive cost reduction. Our recent polls show that the markets actually receive transactions very positively and reward smart strategic transactions. The stock price of acquirers has actually been increasing by 2% following the announcement of an acquisition. And this is in contrast with historical pattern where stock prices actually decreased. And that indicates that markets do expect continued growth. So it's not a surprise that when we polled executives, we heard that 59% of companies surveyed expect to pursue acquisitions in the next 12 months. So everything so far points towards continued activity in the M&A front. However, the recent activity does have even though the deals are likely to continue to go through, there isn't volatility. It does have an impact in executives' perspective. When we surveyed executives, we found that 29% of them are concerned about the increased global and regional political instability, and 24%, a quarter of those surveyed, are concerned about volatility in commodities and currencies. So we see that the executives are concerned about the external environment. And these concerns actually make it all the way to the boardroom discussions. Our EY survey showed that the instability is indeed a top-of-mind concern in boardrooms. Managing a company's asset portfolio, whether this is a business unit, or product lines, or assets, that is also an important topic. And we will touch upon that later today in our discussion. In the recent years, activist investors have been very vocal at scrutinizing underutilized assets and uses of capital, and this may be partly responsible for many divestitures we see lately. As it is common, of course, we see that mergers and acquisitions are also recurring boardroom topics. So in the next slide, here you can see now that proof whether executives are indeed serious about acquisitions is on where they put their money. Our survey showed that on average, 30% of capital allocated goes to inorganic growth objectives. That includes M&A, alliances, and joint ventures. So we can see that executives are indeed still interested and willing to put money into acquisitions. And An additional insight is around sources for targets and acquisitions. So a significant portion of the capital goes to finance cross-sector deals. I think we mentioned earlier that 59% of companies expect to actively pursue acquisitions in the next 12 months. Of that, almost half, 48% of companies intend to pursue acquisitions outside their own sector. You can see the results here of our survey, and you can see that more than a third of the survey responders stated that access to innovation or production technologies is a driver for cross-sector deals. These deals are a way for buyers to access new technologies or materials available in other sectors. Either as a potential buyer or seller, you probably want to broaden your scope to look for opportunities outside your own sector. So in practice, though, we see that companies often struggle to realize the deal value. The deals are complex, many moving parts, and they can actually fail to live up to expectations for many reasons. As you can see that from the survey results here, poor integration, bad assumptions, and failure to meet synergies are some common reasons. In the next few minutes, we're going to cover some of these points in a bit more detail. I wanted to briefly mention the role of digital technologies in deals. So since the early stages of M&A, early days of M&A, the introduction of tools has actually made a big improvement in the way deals are conducted across all stages of the deal lifecycle. That includes evaluating targets and doing market analysis on how we do due diligence and how we plan the integration or carve out. And there's a number of tools available out there that can help to reduce the execution risk, and that's also reflected in the survey results that you see here.
Yeah, and in fact, for the due diligence aspect of this, Elias, clearly virtual data rooms such as ShareVault can really help accelerate due diligence. Unfortunately, some due diligence data rooms are very clunky, sort of older technology that actually can tend to slow down a transaction, so that's actually an important aspect of what ShareVault invests heavily in, of making sure that the performance, ease of use, and speed of the data room is there so that due diligence can be accelerated by the use of the data room.
Absolutely. Thanks very much, John, for chiming in. So let us now go to the second polling questions, and I wanted to turn this now over to the to our audience and get your perspective. What is your prediction for M&A for 2016? So compared to 2015, do you think that deal volume and value will be stronger, about the same, or weaker? Please enter your responses.
All right, that's a good number, so I'll go ahead and close the poll at this point and share the results.
Interesting. Well, thanks everybody for sharing their perspectives. Okay, so just to recap, so far we talked about the broader M&A landscape and what really drives deal activity and its success, at least at a high level. So in the next few minutes, we're going to cover some of the common issues and potential considerations on how to mitigate those issues, and then we'll wrap it up with some conclusions. So moving on to the next slide, we see that the M&A market will probably continue to grow, but with the macroeconomic environment tightening, I think either whether it grows or not, the margin of error in any case will be narrower. So at the same time, we do have activist investors who are increasingly advocating to divest underperforming assets and rationalize the use of capital. So getting an acquisition right means that you got to be aware on what are the common pain points, and then be able to address them. So despite the complexities of an acquisition, the long-term success can actually increase if you prepare and plan ahead of time. Whether you're the buyer or the seller, you need to engage early in the diligence process and in the planning phase, and take a structured approach to avoid surprises. In the next, maybe 15, 20 minutes or so, we're going to discuss in more detail some of these potential issues listed here, and talk about some thoughts and considerations on how to mitigate those issues. So one common area there where we see a lot of surprises around mergers and integrations is around revenue growth projections. during the due diligence phase and the implication it has on resources and investment required by the buyer. Growth projections can have implications on valuation, and understanding their effect on required resources, people, skills, or capabilities impacts also integration planning and ultimately impacts whether you're successful or not in your integration. So, as you can see from the points listed around common issues, sellers can build credibility with buyers by presenting a well-founded revenue projection. We often see that infamous hockey stick revenue projection where revenue grows rapidly in 2 to 3 years. And in most cases, that's driven by the adoption of a new product, expansion into a new market, or a combination of the two. In many cases, we see that the seller assumes faster future revenue growth from products in development pipeline. But the complication is that the historical track record may point to a less rapid growth. So it's very important to be able to explicitly reason or provide a justification behind the growth projections that the seller puts forward. So, for example, what are the drivers behind the growth? What operating assumptions are we making? One common example is penetration rates for past products can be, or new market entry can be lower than projected for future products. So the seller may need to focus on making a case supporting their projections on what are the penetration rates assumed, identify what are the drivers, and then the assumptions behind those projections. By doing that, the seller appears to be and is better prepared to justify a good valuation price, a favorable valuation price for the company. And that has also implications on resource requirements. The sellers can minimize the surprises by doing proper planning. So even in the case where there's a true breakthrough in revenue growth in the next 2 to 3 years, often we see that the level of resources required to support growth is not fully captured in the resource plans. For example, does the company have a sales force deployed in a way that enables product launch activities? Or do you have the quote-to-cash capabilities required to bill your customers? Or do you have the service and support infrastructure required to support the customers in the field? When you have explosive revenue growth, sometimes any of these links may fail, and that can impact your overall success. So the question is really, do the resource plans that you have capture your future growth? Do you assume any efficiency or productivity improvements? Do you have a crisp plan on how you're going to be able to keep up with rapid growth? And by doing so, if you do, you can have a very credible business plan that a buyer can believe in. So just to recap here, we need to make sure that projections for resources are in line with projections and capture the cost structure projections. Assumptions of productivity need to be justified and scrutinized. And for future product launches, just make sure that the track record for the R&D team is in line with the projections. So any assumptions you make on time to market or time to value are at the historical baseline, or if they're going to deviate from that, then make sure there is a clear justification and support of why you expect that this is going to be the case. So this is these are some key points around revenue growth. Another key area that we see issues, if we can move to the next slide, please. Yeah, thank you, is around designing the future operating model. So we discussed earlier that companies seek to grow their product development capabilities via acquisitions. The challenge is how effectively can they integrate their product development and R&D organization. We often hear stories about delayed product launches and ballooning operating costs after an acquisition. And in many instances, this is the result of inflexible or incompatible operating models for the product development function between the buyer and the acquired company. So for example, the product development process approach may be fundamentally different between the two companies, or the R&D footprint may be too spread out, or perhaps the collaboration model with partners, customers, or vendors may be quite different. And the impact of that is that the development teams that operate with incompatible processes and structures will inherently be less productive. They're going to lose key talent, and they will face delays in product launches. And all of these actually, at the end of the day, will impact the deal value realized. So to address this, we suggest that you start with the due diligence stage. Work closely with the other party, whether you're the buyer or the seller, and assess the compatibility of the operating models between the two companies. Make sure you map the current and interim and end state operating model, focusing on a few key items, like, for example, process. Capture the critical processes, the must-haves, to ensure continuity in your business, and focus on integrating those first. Look at the organization and capture, what are the skills and what are your needs, and try to align the two so that you have the right talent at the right place and right time. Look at, business practices. Be open at picking the best available practices from either the acquiring or the acquired company, whichever has the best processes and capabilities. Sometimes we see that smaller companies have more modern and more updated processes than older and bigger ones, because they start with a clean slate. Also, take an opportunity to revisit and rationalize your approach on outsourcing and how you use third-party services like outsourcing partners and vendors. Look at your IT infrastructure and ensure that teams have a common set of tools to work with. Decide how you're going to engage your customers and have a unified approach. That will prevent confusion on your customer side, and you'll be able to have a unified approach where the customers will not feel that there's been any disruption in business as a result of the acquisition. And finally, use all of the above factors to put together a blueprint for the future operating model and how to achieve it, and come up with a crisp implementation roadmap so you can have a clear journey on how to achieve the end state for the acquisition. So this is that was the area around operating model. A third area we discussed and I wanted to touch on is around the product portfolio. So a very common challenge that we see for companies that were acquired is that they struggle on how they fit into the broader product portfolio. Most companies have very clearly articulated strategies, but their portfolios don't always reflect it. For example, a company may seek to grow, but at the same time, the portfolio of that company is dominated by cash cows. And that means that most of the funding goes to the established products at the expense of growth products. A second challenge is that the companies tend to allocate resources in ways that favor established products over ones that are not yet proven, but likely to drive future growth. Imagine a product manager for an established product. That manager can have a much more robust business case for investment, and therefore he or she can be much more likely to receive a larger slice of the pie in terms of funding versus one for an unproven product that doesn't have a robust business case yet, but has a huge or much bigger growth potential. So a third challenge is that serial acquirers, companies that buy companies back to back, often end up with very fragmented product portfolios. And that means that as a newly acquired company, you may find yourself into a silo in the bigger company. And that means that you may have an optimized product portfolio inside your company, but your portfolio is not optimized at a global scale within the larger company. And that means that you fail to achieve the scale you need. And this is a missed opportunity to play in a larger league after the acquisition. So some potential considerations along those lines would be to look at, first of all, make sure that as a newly acquired company, make sure that there is enough investment in innovation projects that support the strategic objectives. Sometimes companies tend to allocate certain amount of R&D funding for projects that don't have a clear ROI, yet they offer a significant growth potential in the future. from a buyer's perspective, look at your portfolio and think: are you the best? Are you putting in good use your assets? Maybe it makes sense to even divest or wind down some assets that don't get full attention or full funding from you. A second area for consideration is around the allocation methodology. So I think we discussed it briefly, but make sure there is a dedicated funding process for exploratory projects. IBM, I think, is one of these companies that's famous for investing, and they know that out of 10 projects they invest in, only one will make it to market, and they're okay with that. So that's just one example of how allocating funding to unproven projects can actually pay off in the end in terms of being a leader in technology. And finally, rationalize your products and investment priorities on a corporate-wide scale. So that is coming from a buyer's perspective. It's always a good idea to step back, look at your portfolio across silos, across BUs, remove silos, and then try to optimize your portfolio on a company-wide basis, which will allow you to then place bigger bets and realize bigger economies of scale. Okay, now this is time for poll question number 3. So from your experience, which of these areas that we discussed has been most challenging to you? And this can be both from a buyer's perspective or a seller's perspective. Developing revenue growth projections, designing the future operating model, or managing the combined product portfolio, or other. Interesting. So what I'm seeing here is that the operating model is the most common challenge. This is actually very interesting, and that is also in line with what I've seen in the past. It's the source of most anxiety, I think, from both the acquiring and the acquired company perspective. So thank you, everybody, for providing all that feedback. So with that, let's wrap it up with some key conclusions here. So what we saw from a number of different sources is that the macroeconomic environment is indeed becoming tighter. Deals will continue. The jury's out whether the M&A activity will go up or will go down. But one thing everybody agrees is that the margin for error is going to be narrower. Now, despite the complexities of an acquisition, I think both the buyer and the seller can benefit by preparing and engaging early in the planning process that starts from selecting the target, doing a thorough and robust due diligence, and then planning the integration phase early to make sure that all risks are mitigated ahead of time. And finally, I think the buyers and the sellers need to focus specifically around how they optimize their operating system that includes the processes, the people, and the systems, so that at the end of the day, after the acquisition, the business continuity is not impacted, and both partners and customers and employees feel that the transition has been a smooth and effective one, and investors realize maximum value from their investment. And here we do have some links here that you can follow and get some up-to-date information on M&A trends and EY's perspective on those. Go ahead, John.
Great. So now I'm going to jump over. I'm going to get out of this presentation mode and jump over to a web browser where I'm going to actually log into a ShareVault as a user to show how ShareVault can actually accelerate the pace of due diligence. And so what you see here is the login screen for ShareVault. And by the way, this is going to be a very quick and accelerated demo. You can go to the ShareVault website to sign up for a more extensive demo if this is of interest to you. It's definitely the case that speeding up due diligence is an important aspect of making sure that the due diligence process goes smoothly, and having the right kind of data room can actually help in that process. So one of the things that ShareVault invests heavily in is making sure that the data room itself is quite fast. So as you can see here, ShareVault has the ability to categorize documents by tags, which you see over here on the left. You can think of them as folders. So this is your due diligence list represented over here on the left. If you'd like to drill down into a specific area, you can just click on the area that you'd like to see, and the documents show here. And we're going to take a quick look in a moment at what it's like for an end user. One of the aspects of preparing a data room that you want to have good tools for to move quickly is making sure that you can organize your data room quickly and easily. So for example, I can grab these tags here if I decide I want to reorganize my data room, and I can drag and drop them down here, and suddenly I've reordered my data room. The other thing I can do is if I've decided that I want to put a numbering system on my data room, I can select all my tags. I've just selected them all using my Shift key, and I go here to Settings, and I just simply add numbering and hit Apply. So you have the ability to very quickly, and by the way, it adds the numbering to every document, so now you've got a nice numbered index for your due diligence list. If I want to reorder, it will automatically renumber the index. The other thing you can do is if I've got some documents here that I would like to put into a specific area of the due diligence list, I can take these documents here called minutes, select all three of them, and just drag them into this section called Minute Book. And it's just a matter of drag and drop in order to get documents into the appropriate section. So preparing for due diligence couldn't be easier, and it's made much faster by having the right kind of tools. And actually, if you come and take a look at ShareVault as a demo, you'll see the extent to which we've taken the acceleration of preparing for due diligence. Another thing to take a look at is the best way to get to know your buyer during the due diligence process is to look at the buyer's behavior in conducting due diligence, and that's what the reporting tools can do for you. So I can take a look at the behavior of different groups within my due diligence teams, and you can see that this company here, Wickham Equity, has been much less active than Worthington Capital. So Worthington Capital has been spending a lot more time reviewing documents. It's logged in 392 times instead of 37, and it's spent 9 hours and 39 minutes actually actively scrolling through documents as opposed to only 3 hours and 18 minutes. So we actually monitor the amount of time people are spending viewing documents on screen, and then you can actually view the amount of time that they're spending on a per topic basis, and you can drill down and see how much time they're spending on individual sections and subsections of the data room index. So it's quite a powerful reporting package. This is in terms of the high-level view. And by the way, we've got a nice color coding scheme so that those numbers get highlighted for you, with red being the highest numbers or the most recent numbers, and blue being the lowest, least active teams. So like I said, Worthington Capital just jumps out at you as the more active participant in due diligence compared to Wickham Equity. The other thing we have is this detailed activity list. You can actually look at, this is just showing the data for today, but I can go and say, all right, I want to see all the documents that have been either viewed or downloaded by Wickham Equity, right? I can even go down to the user level if I want to, but I can go ahead and update the report, and it's going to show me all of the specific actions, viewed or downloaded documents that a given user has seen, what document they looked at, what pages in the document they looked at, so very detailed information about user activity is tracked. And again, looking at buyer activity is a great way to get to know your buyer. What are they interested in? What are their concerns? And you can actually use that information to prepare for due diligence meetings. Okay, let me quickly log out, and now what I'm going to do, I'm going to quickly log out, and now what I'm going to do is log in as an end user. So, and again, I'm going to make this very brief, go into that same data room. Of course, there's a confidentiality agreement that the user needs to agree to before going in, and that's obviously customizable. So now the user is able to view documents here. Again, the user can browse documents by category. The other important thing that ShareVault has is what we call infinite scrolling. So by default, the user is looking at all the documents here, and the user can actually scroll through the entire data room, getting an overview of all of the documents. And that ability to skim through the entire data room requires a special scrolling capability that's actually very difficult to implement in web software, web-based internet software, but we've got it implemented. It's called infinite scrolling, and it allows me to very smoothly scroll through all the content. And the other aspect of it is that you can quickly take a peek at the first page. We call it a zoomable thumbnail, the first page of each document. And then to view a document, you can just click on it, and it'll bring it up right inside the browser, nothing to install, no plugins, no special readers, and it's a secure viewer. I can't copy and paste. I can't forward this document. It's a secure viewer. If I have the right to print it, it's going to have a watermark with my name on it on every page, and my activity, which pages I've specifically viewed and how much time I've spent viewing the document is automatically being tracked as I move through this. Now, another important aspect of due diligence to make it fast is to make it easy for your end users to find things. So let me just show you an example. I've just typed in the word liability into the search engine, and it's a very high-performance search engine that comes back and shows you, ranked by relevance, how the word liability and its grammatical variations are being used in each of these cases. So it really helps you find important pieces of information in the due diligence set. So there's a lot more to ShareVault and the way it can accelerate due diligence. As you can see, it's super easy to use and very fast and responsive, and that's part of what helps create value for our customers. And so make sure to schedule a more comprehensive demo with a ShareVault specialist when you get a chance. And at that point, I'm going to stop the demo and go ahead and to look at some of the questions that have been submitted here on GoToWebinar. Here's the first question coming in. Do you see a correlation between levels of R&D spend and revenue growth?
No, I think the short answer is no. And one primary example is Apple. Apple is actually in the middle of the pack compared to its competitors in terms of R&D spend. However, as we probably all can guess, the revenue growth and the level of innovation is outpacing all of its competitors, or at least the vast majority. So no, I think what's probably more important is the quality of the projects that somebody is investing their dollars in. So do you invest in projects that are have a high ROI potential? And are you investing in projects along the entire value chain of your company? So you can invest in product development, but also in R&D, or in finance, in operations, and many other ways that allow you to grow your business faster. So it's more about quality and not about quantity.
Okay, great. Looks like there's another question here. By the way, that previous question was from Marilyn, so thank you, Marilyn, for that question. Sam asks, my company is only planning to make a few small acquisitions. How do I simplify the integration process?
So that's actually a very relevant question. Most acquisitions actually are smaller, and the biggest risk in a smaller acquisition is that you can try to, as we say, boil the ocean and try to do more than you need to. Or on the opposite end, you can be unprepared and try to wing it, in which case the chances of issues is pretty high. So I would say that the main thing is focus on continuity after day one. So think, what is the critical path in your value chain within your company? You want to be able to make your products. You want to be able to get them to your customers. You want to be able to pay your employees and meet any regulatory requirements, as are some examples. So think about what are the must-haves and focus on those first. If you get those right, I think that everything else becomes less critical, and something can be done when the budget and when the time frame allows you. So it's all about prioritizing, and it's all about going for the lowest hanging fruit.
Great. So thanks again, Sam, for that question. The next question is from Bernard. What are the 3 to 4 things that I need to get right for a successful integration?
I think we mentioned the operating model. I think that's probably the biggest single thing that you got to focus on, and make sure that you don't try to connect, two different two companies that operate in very different ways. So think about the operating model. The other is start early. You can never start early enough with your integration planning process, and establish a good governance. So what you need to do is have somebody who's accountable for the deal. In many cases, companies don't have a dedicated M&A staff, so it becomes someone's second job. So having accountable owners who can be on point for delivering the success for their particular areas, I think is a key enabler for success for an integration. And the other thing is something that applies particularly to medium to larger size companies is make sure you have a very clear change management and communication strategy. So employees who are part of an acquisition can feel either very excited about the prospects, but many can also feel very insecure. So being able to have a very open and very frequent and very thorough communication with your employee and general workforce is very, very important. So focusing, I think, on those 3 or 4 areas will probably improve your chances to have a very successful integration. Any more questions, John?
Yeah, actually, here's a question from Michael. So thanks, Michael, for asking this one. This is actually about ShareVault. So Michael asks, documents in the data room rearranged by users stay rearranged for view by other users, ? And then who staffs the help desk? So the answer to the first question, let me bounce over to ShareVault again. The answer to the first question is, and it's a very important question because many file sharing systems kind of behave like a disk drive. In other words, an end user controls how things are presented on a disk drive. You can sort by folder name, you can sort by file name, for example, or you can sort by date, but there really isn't a way for somebody to control the presentation of how it looks by default to the end user. So in terms of when I showed how you can drag and drop to reorder this index here, that's what the administrator on the sell side does to organize the data room in the best way to present his due diligence materials. The end user cannot reorganize these tags. However, depending on what you're trying to do as an end user, you might be interested in looking at things in a different way. So for example, the default sort order is to sort by index, which is showing the files in order according to the tags that are currently selected. So if I select corporate documents and financials, it's going to show just those documents here, and I can scroll through what's selected in the order of index. But I can also say, look, I want to see what's most recently been uploaded into the data room by clicking on date published. So the end user has the ability to change what's presented by default, but there's no way to, for the end user to reorganize this index. So hopefully that answers your question. So the drag and drop that I was showing is something that the sell side, the administrator on the sell side can do to prepare his due diligence materials, his or her due diligence materials for best presentation to the end users on the buy side doing the review of the materials. So hopefully that answers the first part of your question. And the second part of the question about who staffs the help desk, we actually have ShareVault experts who staff the help desk so that when a call comes in, you're talking right away to somebody who knows ShareVault, who understands M&A or partnering or fundraising. That means that you're talking to someone who really understands how ShareVault is used in the context of a data room. And that's really important at 2 a.m. the night before a deal is supposed to close. You want to be able to call and say, look, my buyer is asked to provide some additional information, and I just, I have a question. You're going to want to have someone who can answer the question right away and can help you out immediately. So it's a 24/7 support team who understands the product and who understands the business processes that our product supports. So That is actually, and thank you again, Michael, for that great question. That is actually the last question in the list that's been submitted by you. Thank you very much for your attendance, for your attention to the presentation. And also, I'd like to thank you, Elias, for sharing your perspective on ways to maximize the valuation of assets in a merger or acquisition. This has been a very active and insightful discussion, and thank you everybody in the audience for joining us today as well. As a reminder, the recording of the webinar will be made available to you, and we will notify you via email when it's ready. Okay, thanks, Elias, for a great presentation, and thanks everybody else. We wish each of you a wonderful remainder of your day. Okay, bye.